Second heavy hitter of the evening. John Yates, I suspect everybody in this room knows John as well, heads the technology practice at Morris, Manning & Martin. He was around pre-bubble. He was around for the bubble. First time I ever met him was a tag event where you couldn't get in. There were so many people trying to get in. And then the bust, where you could get into any tag event. And then has now ridden the gentle wave back up. He has been named by the Atlanta Business Chronicle as one of the city's most influential leaders. He is a budding author. He's writing a book called The Art of Business Friendship. And earlier this month was the recipient of the TurkNet Leadership Award presented at the Aquarium in a ceremony by former UPS chief Oz Nelson. And quoting Oz here, he said, "Jan is an extraordinary connector, makes positive partnerships, never takes credit, never injects ego." Should be an interesting presentation now from our keynote speaker. Please welcome John Yates.
Richard, thank you for those very kind remarks, and I am certainly honored to be here with you today. I was particularly pleased to have Kevin ask me to be the keynote for a couple reasons. One was, for me, it's like a family reunion. As we'll hear in a few moments, the Southeastern Software Association is an organization that I have had the pleasure of being associated with since its inception. Actually, I guess it's preconception. And it's an organization that is extremely important for our community now, but maybe more significantly in the future. Now, I want to thank Kevin. I also want to thank Tino for his great leadership in TAG, the finalists certainly for the Impact Awards, and all the folks that are here. And I also want to thank all the entrepreneurs, many of whom here in the audience I've had the pleasure of working with for many years. What we're going to talk about today is a little bit of the history of this organization, and maybe even more importantly, some of the lessons that we've learned and how we can use those lessons to continue the Southeastern Software Association as a vibrant organization that is a key part of the technology future of Georgia. And we're going to go through a little history lesson first of all. Now let me say as well, I'm very proud that all of you have decided to come to this event to listen to Kevin, Tino, myself, and others, because I know you could be watching the Braves game. And so, because of that reason, and because we all care about the Braves as well, if you are watching the Braves game on your phone, or you have a score, and a Braves score, I give you permission to raise your hand and put the number of fingers up that is the score for the Braves. Forget about the other side. All right, so let's take a look at the situation and a history lesson. And first of all, how many folks, if you notice the first date is 1951, how many folks were alive in 1951 that are willing to admit that? Raise your hand, please. That's pretty amazing. I think there's a number of liars in the room. Okay, Georgia Tech researchers start Scientific Atlanta. One of our most significant organizations, spawned hundreds of technology companies, dozens of software companies. 1963, Jim Edenfield and Tom Newberry started Management Science Atlanta as a consulting firm. Management Science Atlanta, which later became Management Science America. 1966, the Braves moved from Milwaukee. Hard to believe. 68, John Imlay joins Management Science America. 1974, who was here in 74, witnessed Hank Aaron's home run record? Let the record reflect that's about 6 or 7 people. Very significantly, 1977, Dennis Hayes and Dale Hetherington, 2 Georgia Tech grads, start Hayes Microcomputer Products, which we'll hear in a few moments when Dennis tells you about how he started that and created an industry standard that was globally accepted. And many of us remember those days. All right, let's shift over here to the 70s, late 70s. 79, major expansion to Hartsfield. ATDC, formed in 1980. 1983, Nora Mosley and Advanced Technology Development Fund, the first 2 venture funds in Atlanta. 84, the founding of the Southeastern Software Association. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment and how that organization, our organization, was actually founded. Peachtree Software in 85. How many remember the Democratic National Convention in 1988? The record reflect a few Democrats in the room. 1989, MSA was bought by Dun & Bradstreet for $300 million. 1990, Lotus acquires Samna. Samna was a word processing firm. You're going to hear from Saeed Mohammadian in a moment about how he founded Samna, which was a leading company, again, a global leader in word processing. Brock Control Systems goes public in 93. Charles Brewer starts MindSpring in 1994. 1994 also, Chris Klaus and Tom Noonan start ISS, Internet Security Systems, which we all know has became one of the leading companies in the world in the Internet security area. All right, this is the one I like. 1995, Braves win the World Series. Yay. Let's hope it happens again in 2011. All right, 1996, Summer Olympics come to town. 1998, Jeff Arnold starts WebMD. ISS goes public in 99. Falcons go to the Super Bowl in 98. Could happen again. 1999, as Tino mentioned, the founding of TAG, the coalescence of technology organizations in our community at a time when we desperately needed the leadership that Tino then brought to us and the organization that we have today. 1999, WebMD announces a $5 billion merger. The company wasn't around but more than a couple years. And we're going to hear from Jeff Arnold, who is still in this community, in Buckhead, walking around doing other great things. VC investment in Georgia, as Tina talked about, tops $1 billion in 99. In 2000, Nora Mosley raises the largest venture fund in Atlanta, $320 million. All right, the question is, why the SSA? Why did we form the SSA? Well, a couple reasons. One is, there was an organization in 1981 when I came to town called the Advanced Technology Development Institute. Does anybody remember that group? Okay, that was the predecessor of everything we're talking about today. That was a group that was created primarily technology leaders, but also a number of service providers in this community. But it was a fairly closed organization, unlike what we've done in TAG today, which is be all-encompassing. The ATDI was a little more cliquish, let us say. And quite frankly, some of us were newcomers to town, didn't know much about Atlanta except where Peachtree Street was. But we did know Georgia Tech was spawning a lot of technology companies and a lot of software. And we said, this doesn't have to be a closed community. We can really expand beyond that. So what we did was, and how we did it, was to form a nonprofit corporation in 1984. We borrowed some bylaws from another technology group. We created an initial board, which actually we'll take a look at in a second. We defined a mission and we selected a name. Now, selecting a name was particularly challenging, all right? We didn't have a name. All we had was this Advanced Technology Development Institute, not a particularly catchy name. And so we said, we need to come up with a really cool name. We wanted it to have a regional focus. We wanted to have software concentration. So we looked at several options. And I remember walking down the hall to my business colleague at the time, Les Trackman, who was a software executive turned lawyer, and I said, Les, we need to create this organization. And Les said, great, we'll have it here in Atlanta, we'll call it the Atlanta Software Society. I said, the Atlanta Software Society. I said, I don't think that acronym is going to work. Although some people might say it's appropriate at times. So I said, let's look at some other names. What do we talk about? The Georgia Software Association. Well, that was too provincial. Computer Organization of the Southeast, that didn't work at all. So we said the Southeastern Software Association, and it's a regional concept. But at the time, Atlanta was not just the capital of the Southeast business, it was the capital of the Southeast in software as well. So it really fit then, and I think it could fit today as well. This was our birth certificate. You can't read it very well, but it's the Secretary of State's filing of the Articles of Incorporation, April 6, 1984. It's fairly easy to file because there wasn't really much to it at the time. We had an initial board that was really pretty simple. And if we look at that initial board, the board came up with a mission. And the mission actually is very close to the mission today of the Southeastern Software Association, a little shorter, was to organize a software community in the Southeast in order to share common interests, contacts, sources of capital, and business relationships similar to Silicon Valley. Now, the only example we had out there was Silicon Valley. And that was where there was another software association that had been created. One was getting ready to be formed in Washington State because, of course, Microsoft was there. But we looked at Silicon Valley, and what we said, first of all, is who are we going to get to bring this organization together? We filed the articles of incorporation. So we looked at the folks that, quite frankly, had some money at the time. We looked at the lawyers and the accountants and the PR firms and others. We looked at some software companies that were in town, but a lot of them had not been funded because, as we mentioned, only 2 venture funds here in town. And quite frankly, they didn't have a lot of capital at the time. We looked for sponsors, and I actually talked to my sister. Now, my sister is someone that, I guess if you had to say that there was a mother of the Southeastern Software Association, it would be Jean. Because when I talked with her back in 1983, I said, Jean, we've got all this software community in Atlanta, but nothing that's organized our community in a way around software companies. And Jean had moved to California in 1978 and got enamored with microcomputers. And she actually built a microcomputer and was in the middle of Silicon Valley. And she said, John, what you need to do is, first of all, you need to move to Silicon Valley. And I said, that's fabulous. I'd love to do that, except I just got married. My wife will not move to California. So what's the second thing I should do, Jean? And she said, form an organization there in Atlanta that brings together the software community. We've done that in Silicon Valley. It works. There is an ecosystem here in the Valley, and you probably have one there. It may be nascent, but you can probably form it. And so Jean prompted me to go off, file the articles, to sit down with Les, and work with so many other folks to create the organization. This is actually my sister's first book that she used to generate the money to start her own technology company in the Valley. It's the User's Guide to the Unix System. Does anybody have this book? Well, I'll tell you a quick funny story. I was a company that back in 1986, I would drive to work every day, and I would pass by this one little strip shopping center, and there were signs there, Dr. Jones Podiatrist, Dr. Smith Dentist, Software Solutions. And I said, I see myself as a technology lawyer. And I kept driving by this sign, Software Solutions. And I said, I have to know who these people are. And being a lawyer, but also being a bit of a salesman, I said, I'm going to stop by one day. And I did. I stopped by the office. I walked in. I knocked on the door. Turned out it was a dentist office. And I said, this isn't a good sign. And I said, well, where's Software Solutions? And they said, well, it's in the back there. So I walked through the dentist's office as they're filling cavities and doing all sorts of other things. Go to the back. There's a little door. Knock on the door. And a fellow by the name of Jess Solomon opens the door. Jess was a client of mine for about 15 years after this. But I walk in and I say, I'm John Yates, and I'm trying to find out about Software Solutions. We're trying to organize this Southeastern Software Association. Well, Jess had never had any visitors. None of the patients ever walked into his office. It was not a walk-in place. And as Jess was turning me around to move me out the door, I looked over my shoulder and I said, is that my sister's book there on your bookshelf? Which, of course, was a bookshelf with cinder blocks and 2x4s. And I said, I think that's a User's Guide to the Unix System by Gene Yates and Rebecca Thomas. And sure enough, he had it on his bookshelf. He's the only person I've ever seen that had that book on their bookshelf. But the interesting thing was it allowed us to get our initial speaker. So I said, Gene, you need to come in. It was your idea. You need to come in and be our initial speaker. We don't have an international, national leader in this area. Gene was very involved with the Unix operating system. How many remember Unix? All right, well, the Unix operating system at the time was the leading multi-user multitasking operating system in the world, but it was created by AT&T. It was being refined by Berkeley, and the other operating systems out there, the multi-user multitasking operating systems, were things like MPM and PIC and other operating systems you may have never heard of before. So Gene was out there blazing some trails in Unix. Does anybody ever remember the Microsoft version of the Unix operating system? It was Xenix. So for 7 months, Gene Yates and Bill Gates traveled the United States pushing Unix and Xenix until Bill Gates said, we're not doing this anymore. So we pulled Gene in and we said, Gene, tell us about the software community. And we were fortunate to get her to bring together this meeting. Does anybody know where the first meeting of the Southeastern Software Association was? It was in the Georgia Pacific building downtown in their auditorium. Has anybody ever been in the auditorium at the Georgia Pacific building? Probably not. All right, so who was our initial board of directors? This is very, very hard to read, but I'm going to read off some of these names. This happened to be an initial board meeting, and you can see how technologically astute we were. I looked down this list, and I realized of the 14 people that are there, 13 of these companies are no longer in existence. Now, they were sold or went out of business, but they included, in addition to myself, C&S Bank, Ernst & Winnie, Brock Control Systems, the Software Link, which, by the way, had a look-alike multi-user multitasking operating system called PC MOS, as opposed to MS-DOS. The executive director at the time was Dick Jones. Sales Technologies, which happened to have been a company that Chuck Johnson was the CEO of, and Chuck Johnson then went and founded Nora Mosley. Inforum, does anybody know where the Inforum building is? Well, it's the American Cancer Society building downtown. It was a building built specifically for technology companies. Back when the thought was, some of us remember that, when you were going to buy your computer by going to a big trademark, just like you would go and buy clothes in a giant mall. And the Inforum building was designed for that. SAMNA, MSA, Peachtree Software, McGee Enterprises, Alexander Communications. There's only one company on that list that remains today in existence and continuing to operate the way they were before. Does anybody know who that company is? Morris, Manning & Martin. And that's not a pitch for my firm. It's just to say the software industry changes more dramatically than the legal industry.